Welcome to the Success at Work virtual mentoring series. Today's installment is on the power of saying no and how to say no gracefully and professionally. Our speakers today are Amanda.
Hello.
Rachel.
Hi.
And myself. Today we are going to be covering the power of saying no. We're going to do a deep dive into the spoken and the unspoken no's. How to keep it equitable and how this simple two-letter word can empower you. So let's get this kicked off. Amanda, would you like to talk to us about the unspoken no?
Absolutely. Well, saying no is a powerful tool that many of us are continuously working on developing. But not all no's are verbal. Not all no's are direct. Sometimes declining to take part in something is as simple as not volunteering to do so. When you're in a meeting, you don't have to offer to take notes. You don't need to volunteer to take on certain projects. You don't have to volunteer to organize the company party. While it's certainly appreciated when you do, it's not obligatory. You have to think about your bandwidth. How much do you have on your plate right now? Do you actually have time to take on extra tasks and projects? If you do, then by all means, offer to help out. It will make you look like an engaged, hardworking employee. And you'll also learn a lot and build up your skill set. But if you're already swamped, don't voluntarily add more to your never-ending to-do list. Be honest about your bandwidth. If you're already too busy, not only will taking on extra work be too much for you, it will also likely be a hindrance to the team. You may not be able to do your best work, meaning other people may need to pick up the slack. Rachel and Lynn, have you ever voluntarily taken on an extra project at work knowing you're already too busy? How did that work out?
I don't actually recall doing that. I've always been pretty good at knowing how much I can handle.
Well, for me, absolutely, and many times. I'm going to share one example or experience. When I had one of my coworkers, her husband died, and I realized that the person who was assigned to cover for her was not on top of it. And I just stepped in and started taking care of all the work that had piled up on her desk. No one asked me. I absolutely volunteered. I recognized it needed to be done, and I didn't hesitate. And I'm going to say that 25 plus years later, I had someone do the same for me. So my end here is karma rocks.
Well, that's great. I'm glad it worked out well for you, Lynn. But sometimes you have to really be sure that you actually have the time to help out with other people. Also, one final note I want to make is to consider extracurricular activities your company puts on. If you're too busy to attend the company picnic or spend time with coworkers in the evening, you don't have to take part in these activities either. Don't feel bad about it if you can't attend. So, Lynn, do you have some other ideas you want to talk about the unspoken no?
I'm going to take off where you were talking about the extracurricular activities. And I think that informal company events are a great opportunity to build and strengthen your relationships with coworkers, managers, and executives. People are more relaxed and talkative. You can learn more about a person's passions, their interests at a casual event. You really get to know them better, and you strengthen your relationship. So it's invaluable. And while on the one hand, you need to recognize this as an opportunity, it's not an obligatory punishment. So my suggestion is that, to consider combining in another activity in the same area as the company function, or arriving a bit late or leaving early. And absolutely, if you've already got other things that you've made commitments to, you do not need to feel obligated to attend these. Rachel, what about you?
Well, I mean, I think that there can be a lot of pressure to engage in all that corporate socializing for the reasons that you mentioned, Lynn, as well as just being seen as being part of the team. But remember that companies don't have a right to more of your time after your shift ends. So you really do have an opportunity to be judicious about what you actually want to attend. If you want to take advantage of the opportunity to talk to people in a more relaxed setting, you can. If you have other commitments, you don't have to. Even if you don't have other commitments, but you'd just rather not, then don't. I mean, you've put in your hours and you don't have to stay any longer than that. But this kind of brings me into the idea of saying no to your coworkers, right? So you're probably going to have to say no to your coworkers sometimes throughout your career, especially when they ask you with help for their responsibilities and their projects. Be honest with them about how much you have on your plate. Let them know that you would help if you could, but if you can't, then don't. And be able to just say, I'm sorry, but I don't have enough time to do what you're asking me to do, and I wish I could help, but maybe consider asking somebody else. Lynn, I mean, have you ever had to say no to helping a coworker?
Oh, yes. And there are times that I can't help. I either don't know the information or I do, as you said, have other commitments. I really always try to help where I can. And it could be as simple as a suggestion as you were just making for another resource that they can contact, or setting a time where I can listen to them and listen to their challenges and maybe help them brainstorm some ideas so they can get through the project, which would take a much smaller segment of my time, and I can fit that in. Amanda, what about you?
Yes, I have on a few occasions needed to say no to helping a coworker. Sometimes it's because I'm really too busy and I don't have the time for it. Other times it's because it's not something that I have the expertise to help with. I'm always honest about my reasoning, and depending on why I had to decline, I may offer to help in another way or at a later date.
Right, and that's really good advice, Amanda. So sometimes you can maybe help later on, but if you feel particularly obliged to help at the moment because it's something that you feel partial responsibility over, or you're just a helpful person, consider taking on only part of the task and only ever as much as you can handle. So maybe you don't have the bandwidth to do a lot of the thinking for them or taking on like a very thought-centric part of their project, but maybe you have some time to just fill in some spreadsheets for them or other rote things that they don't have time for, and that's not going to take up too much of your energy that you need to spend on your own projects. Or you might consider helping in other small ways, or as Lynn mentioned, helping them brainstorm and then not doing the actual task with them. Just consider the other ways that you can help, or as Lynn and I have both mentioned, maybe referring them to somebody else who can be of more assistance to them. Now, a bullet's going to come up here about office romance, and that's of course alluding to needing to say no to romantic or sexual overtures from coworkers, and that's something that you definitely may need to practice at some point. And of course, as always, you're not obliged, and in this case, more than anything else, I would recommend saying no. But this also applies to socializing in general, as we've discussed above. You are, of course, allowed to say no to after-work drinks in a casual setting or a romantic one or anything else that's going on. You don't have to go. So just be honest with your coworker about whether you're going to do something or not, and you can be honest about why. If it's you don't have time, it's you don't have time. If it's that you don't want to, that's another thing. Amanda, do you have anything to add here?
Well, I just want to reiterate that it's very good to be clear but brief about why you're saying no. You don't want your coworkers to get the impression that you're simply unhelpful or lazy, or you don't like them and you're not a good team player. If you decline gracefully, they'll usually understand and won't be upset by your lack of help. However, as we'll discuss later on, it's also important to not overshare or overexplain. A brief, undetailed explanation is usually sufficient. Lynn, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm gonna, first of all, I'm not gonna get into the whole office romance, and that really segues into a whole Me Too discussion that is gonna need to be separate. So I'm gonna really focus on just socializing after work, and I've got two experiences I want to share on saying no to one and on another where I said yes to after-hour events. So just to set the scene, in both cases, I was exhausted from business travel, and I literally had a ton of work waiting for me in the hotel room. So anyone who's done a lot of business travel, you get it. um, so both were invitations to join a group of coworkers, peers, and executives for dinner. And in the first case, it was just dinner. And after all, I had to eat. So I went ahead and said yes, and I went out with them to dinner. It ran much longer than I expected, but I got to know everyone at that dinner better than I had for the 6 months prior of just interacting with them at work. So it was really a great experience. I actually felt energized after the dinner. And it was great. It was a great time to say yes. In the second case, it was a dinner and a professional basketball game. And so not only was, of course I had to eat, but it was going to take way more time. And in addition, I had less than zero interest in going to the game. And I truly did have a ton of work waiting for me. And I considered saying yes to the dinner and then grabbing a cab and getting back to the hotel, because it would have been an excellent opportunity to build our relationships, but I felt like I could end up being pressured into going to the game, and I knew I had a lot I needed to get done. So I said no. And I'm sorry I missed that chance to learn more about my colleagues at the dinner. But on the flip side, I got my work all done by midnight, and I actually got some much needed rest. And what's ironic about this second one is that I was saying no to my boss. And so I think that's a great segue into the next one, which is saying no to your boss. And I think that for all of us, it's not a matter of if, it's when you will need to say no to your boss. And for some people, this is an everyday occurrence. I believe that the key to successfully saying no to your manager or supervisor is to meet it head on. Deflection is a weak option, and it's a poor strategy. Being proactive is positive, it's energizing, and it's going to enable a successful outcome. It's really about how you say no, and it's the art of negotiation. So in the scenario of saying no to your boss, you need to flex your response based on the style of the personalities, the circumstances, and the situation. And so I've got some top tips. And my top tips are: 1, just the facts. Don't get emotional, don't stress out, and don't be whiny, okay? 2, take a moment to pause and then choose your response. 3, be flexible. Everything changes, so you have to be ready and willing to reprioritize, whether it's your day, your week, your tasks, what's going on at work. 4, choose your battles wisely. If it is not a big deal, don't make it one, okay? And so I've got some actual examples of how I would respond if my boss added a new project or task to an already overflowing to-do list. So I would say, I need a moment to process what is in our wheelhouse. And then take that moment to rapidly review and evaluate what can be moved or shifted to accommodate the new project. Sometimes that's all you need, is you just need to say, I need that moment. I need a moment to process this. If you need more time to review, then I would say, I need to review what's in our wheelhouse. Would an hour work with you for us to meet and discuss solutions and options to align our schedule? Okay, so there are times when someone throws something, like there's this huge burning project that suddenly just dropped down like napalm on a bridge, and it has to be addressed. And there are things that are going to have to be moved around and shifted. So you want to go in with ideas and solutions. And in my experience, most managers and supervisors are reasonable people. They recognize that they need to move things around and pivot because they do it every day, and they reprioritize the tasks and duties. So those are my suggestions. Rachel and Amanda, do you have any specific technique or phrase you use to set the stage for reprioritizing your tasks or workload? Rachel, why don't you go first?
Well, actually, I think I'd like to jump in here before Rachel. Sorry,
Okay.
Rachel. Normally, I would start by inquiring about how urgent the new task is in comparison to the other tasks already on my plate. In certain cases, I would defer to my manager and reorganize as needed. However, if it's something that I have ownership of, then I would politely tell my supervisor that I'll get to the new task as soon as I complete this other more urgent one. It's important that your manager understands your workload and priorities. It's better that than them thinking you're being insubordinate or lazy.
Yeah, Amanda, I think you have it right there. I would tell my manager what it is that I'm working on and the timeframes for each of those items. And then I would ask my manager if there's anything that needs to be reordered so I could accommodate this new task, or if the new task can wait. If what they're suggesting is an ongoing task that I don't have time for in my daily schedule, I would explain to them that limitation and work with my manager to think of other ways to accomplish the same outcome, to reorganize my daily schedule, or to figure out who else might be able to help within the company.
Yeah, those are both great suggestions. So I think what's important is to find viable options and solutions to present to your manager or supervisor. And there are always things that can be delayed or shifted to another team or another team member, as Rachel just pointed out, or even performed in an alternate manner. So, look to find common ground. Reframe your language so that you're working together on a solution. And, there are times when there is a non-negotiable no, okay? And this could be, as an example, it could be a request to work late. And once again, you need to stick to the facts, be brief, respectful, and polite. There's no need to go into a long explanation, and just keep it simple. So in this example that I'm doing, is just say, unfortunately, that won't be possible as I have a prior commitment tonight. It's clean and simple. Rachel, what are your key tips on saying no to your boss?
So saying no to a boss can be really intimidating, at least it is for me. If you have an understanding boss, a reasonable boss that Lynn said most managers are, and I agree, then all the tips Lynn has gone over in the slide will suffice. However, if your boss is more authoritarian, you might have to think of other ways. I mean, I would first do the things that Lynn has discussed here, but if that doesn't cut it, then you might want to consult with your coworkers to see how they best communicate with your boss. Or if your boss is being particularly unreasonable, I suppose, you can go to their superior or to go to HR if it's an ongoing issue. But generally speaking, I would try to accommodate your boss where you can, but then don't bend on your values. As in Lynn's suggestion, keep those family commitments. Amanda, what would you say here?
Well, I think you both covered this topic really well. Again, as long as your boss understands your reasoning and you're both on the same page, he or she will likely understand and be reasonable about why you're saying no, or no for now. Speak clearly and always be ready to reorganize and reprioritize.
Perfect.
So I think this leads us to our next slide about being a doormat. As we've been discussing throughout this whole webinar, don't feel like you always have to say yes. You don't need to volunteer to do things. You don't have to agree to do things that others ask of you. And if you're too busy or if it's not a good fit for you, be honest. You don't want to develop what we call doormat syndrome. Don't be a pushover who always says yes even when you want to say no. If you do, this can hurt you in a few ways. On the one hand, others may notice your reputation and take advantage of you. This can be draining for you, but it can also be harmful to your career. You may gain a reputation as someone who does not know how to set priorities or think for herself. Others may not trust your judgment and pass you over for promotions. While they'll appreciate your hard work, you won't be seen as a leader. On the other hand, it's simply exhausting to say yes to everything. You won't have enough time to work on what matters to you and your career. You must set boundaries and keep your own goals and objectives in mind. Make sure that the things you're agreeing to do, in general, fit with your career goals. So, Rachel and Lynn, have you ever felt like a doormat? And if so, how did you overcome this?
I don't know that I have. I mean, maybe at one time I fell into doormat type behavior, but that definitely changed when I was about 20. Because, major depressive disorder can really give you perspective on what you can and cannot take on. Lynn, what's your perspective?
Well, on another topic in my home life, I definitely feel like a doormat quite a bit of the time. But for work, yes, once again, I have felt like a doormat. And over the years, I've learned to be proactive and really grab the bull by the horns. And I'm still working on it. So it's so important to be constructive in my approach. And I am going to tell you one little experience and story of where, when we had an experience at a company I was working at where we were downsizing and executives were being eliminated. I was a senior executive vice president, and I survived. And the reason I survived was because I did pick up extra projects. I worked longer hours. So that was a case where I was absolutely recognized for, the hard work I was putting in. So while I didn't feel in that case, I was being a doormat, but there is a balance with everything that we do. So I'm just going to throw that out there. So that while that was my experience, there's so much you have to consider with being a doormat, because you absolutely do not want people to take advantage of you. And I've definitely been in that situation myself. But it's also important to really respect the situation and to do things that will really further impact your career. So it's a balancing act.
Right, I agree. And I've said it so many times. A yes means nothing if you can't say no. Don't become that person that people can always count on to do absolutely anything, because as Amanda said, you'll end up being taken for granted. Be honest about what you do and don't have time for, and what you do and don't want to do in some cases. That way, your help will be far more meaningful. Remember, it's not on you to do someone else's job. So this can sort of segue into the pitfalls of oversharing, because oftentimes when you say no to something, you'll want to explain in detail why it is that you're saying no. As we know here at Petite Queen, I am an avid oversharer. I bring it a lot in our content here. And remember that you actually don't have to explain yourself. No is sufficient. But as we've said before, it can sometimes help you to have a brief explanation so that you don't come off as lazy or unhelpful. But when you are explaining yourself, be careful about what you say. If your bandwidth can't handle another project because of something in your personal life, limit how much detail that you provide about that, if you provide any detail at all. Because the person that you're speaking to might end up using it against you as an excuse to reduce your or use it as an excuse to reduce your responsibilities, and possibly your pay as a result. Amanda, have you ever found yourself over-explaining what should have been a simple no?
I don't think I have, no. I rarely have a problem with over-explaining or oversharing. It's just not my personality. What about you, Lynn?
Oh, yeah. Yes, especially earlier in my career. I also can be an oversharer. And I think for women, there's absolutely another pitfall here of oversharing things that are going on in our personal lives, as often we are primary caregivers, and that puts us in people will view us in that negative light. Well, you're always doing things with your family, or you can't do these things. They wouldn't say that about a man. So it's bizarre, but it's something to definitely keep and be mindful of, and to be polite and respectful, but you don't need to go into any kind of detail as to the other commitments that you already have.
Yeah, you're right, Lynn. You mentioned that there's a tendency of women to over-explain. I think that there's also a pressure on women to over-explain, because when we say no, we want to soften the blow as much as possible. There's a pressure on women to be kinder in general, and so they might want to explain in detail why they are saying no to a particular situation. I would say try to buck off that kind of pressure, because you don't owe an explanation to anyone. Lynn, is there anything more that you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I think that there's one thing that I would recommend. This is going to sound really wonky. There we go, wonky. But there is a movie called A Town That Came a Courtin', and in this, the main character, the way she handles some really difficult situations, she doesn't overshare, but she handles them with such grace, and I think that it's just a great example of something where you could watch a movie and you may think it's really silly and stupid, but the main character on that, what I really admired about it was how she handled so many of the situations, and yet maintained her own level of personal integrity, in that sense of still being kind, but being very professional, being very caring to other people, but firmly saying no in a very graceful way. So I'm just going to throw that out there. How about you, Amanda?
Well, I just want to reiterate what you and Rachel have both said already. I mean, we've talked a lot about being honest and clear about why you're declining, and that is certainly important sometimes, but there are also times where a simple no really will suffice. If you do give a reason, know that you don't have to go into tons of detail or exaggerate it either. Sometimes you should keep your personal life personal. There is such a thing as too much information. Keep the extra information to yourself, because they don't need to know everything, and they probably don't really care to know all the extra details. Just play it by
I wish
ear.
someone had told me that there's such thing as too much information.
Yeah, some of us learn the hard way. You're welcome. Yep. In general, just play it by ear and keep in mind who you're talking to and how what you're seeing may be received by that particular individual. So one last thing I want to talk about is keeping the no equitable. You have to keep it fair. Consider how often you ask others to do things. Now, consider how often others ask you to do things. Are these amounts roughly the same? Or is there some disparity there? Are you being treated like a doormat and always asked to do things with little in return? Or, on the flip side, are you constantly asking favors of others but offering little yourself? Lynn and Rachel, have you ever noticed a situation where you and another person had an unequal ratio of requests? Who is asking who for more help? And how did you resolve this situation?
Well, absolutely. And this has definitely happened to me. And my recommendation is to, bring it up front and discuss the elephant in the room. Don't attack, don't whine, don't be defensive. Instead, and ask for their help and ideas on a path forward and how you can resolve the situation, and really express that these are your feelings and your thoughts, and what's their input, and then find that common ground. Rachel, what about you?
Well, I mean, I think I've always had pretty equitable relationships, but it does bring into mind, if you find that you are being asked to do a lot of things and you're not getting much in return, I mean, you might want to ask yourself the simple question, are you asking for help? Because it could be that the other person is more than willing to help you, but you don't feel comfortable asking, which I suppose might be the subject of another webinar. Who knows? But also if you find that you're actually doing most of the asking, it's okay to bring that up too. You might go up to the other person and say, hey, I feel like I ask a lot of you and I don't really get to help you in return. Can we discuss this? Is this an issue? How can I help you? Because that can actually be quite a refreshing and kind thing to say, right? So, I mean, I guess that's my 2 cents there.
Those are some excellent points, Rachel. Thank you. It's so important to have balance in your life and in your job, and to be proactive about making sure there is balance. Try to give as much as you take, and it's okay to request things of your coworkers, but be ready to help out when they need it too. And likewise, if they're asking you for things, don't be afraid to ask them for favors in the future. They'll likely reciprocate, as they'll remember how helpful you were when they needed it. This webinar isn't just about saying no all the time. Sometimes you should and will say yes, but make sure that those no's and yeses are equitable. Rachel, what else would you like to say about this?
Well, I would say that if relationships aren't equitable, resentment will start to grow. And I think that's one of the reasons why I would recommend bringing it up if you find that you're the one asking more than the other person, because you don't want them to start to resent you either. You want to keep your relationships with your coworkers healthy by keeping things relatively equal. And of course, this isn't to say that you should be keeping score. Like, there should not be a tally sheet, because that's ridiculous. But just keep an eye on the trends. And if you notice that there's just really big inequality, then go ahead and address it. Lynn, what would you want to say?
I'm going to go back to that first story about the coworker whose husband had passed away, and this was early in my career. And when she came back to work, she offered then to cover for me at different points in time, but I rapidly discovered that our styles were so different. I actually had clients call me after the first time that she had handled my accounts and tell me they never wanted to talk to her again. Which, her style was very abrupt. And so, but I continued to cover for her whenever she was gone, because her mix of business was so different, and it was an opportunity for me to be exposed to new projects and new people and new methods, and it was a great learning opportunity. So it was definitely not equitable. It was unbalanced, but there was this huge upside for me. And so sometimes I want everyone to keep that in mind. And then there's always like this karmic payback. Years later, I mean, we're talking decades later, she is one of my closest friends. She has been there for me in personal crisis, to hold my hand. So, there are definitely that what I said, karma rocks. So, and there are going to be times when something is very one-sided because of whatever the situation or circumstances are. And the key is if there's never any kind of karmic payback, well, yeah, then it's not equitable. And it is about balance. So I am going to segue right into how is this learning to say no with grace and respect? Why is it such an incredible skill to acquire? And I'm just going to put it right out there. It is going to positively impact every aspect of your life. At its core, I believe that saying no is about not being afraid. The fear of rejection, disappointment, conflict, or of missing out on something. It's a matter of conscious choice to take control. And to further your mission in life, you must be able to say no. And you have to say no to the things that don't speak to your values. And it definitely means saying no to doing all the work. And I mean, this really comes into setting boundaries. Amanda and Rachel, how have you used no to set boundaries?
Well, this is a skill I've had to learn to develop a lot in the last several years. I've always been a bit of a yes woman. I've always been a people pleaser. But as I've gotten older, busier, and less energetic, I've found the need to say no to things that I'm not interested in or don't have the time for. My husband and I have both learned to set work schedule boundaries, which can be an issue when you work from home. Other times, it's saying no to attending an event with a friend or a family member. I try to make sure I'm clear about why I'm saying no, even if it's just a matter of not being of interest to me, so that the other person will understand my schedule and priorities in the future. How about you, Rachel?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't know that I've ever really had a problem with the word no, but I did get really good at it after I started experiencing depression. Because I learned that saying no is better than saying yes and then failing to uphold your promise. After following through on a few of my promises, I had to recognize my limitations and I started saying no, and that really made my life a lot better.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's what this is all about. And I'm going to share one more thing about saying no that transformed my life. And that was about saying no to spending time or being involved with negative people. There is absolutely no greater gift that you can give yourself than learning to say no. Amanda and Rachel, how has saying no transformed your lives?
Well, I alluded to it earlier, but I was a people pleaser for most of my life. I didn't want to hurt other people's feelings. I didn't want them to think I was boring or mean, and I thought saying no would be a negative interaction. I once heard a guest speaker in my college explain that saying yes is the best thing you can do. Even if you think you're not ready or experienced enough for something, it can open doors and lead to exciting new experiences. And while that is certainly true to an extent, you can't become a complete yes person. Learning to say no, kindly and gracefully, allows you to maintain control in your life. Saying yes all the time can leave you feeling stressed and like you have no agency or no say in how your life unfolds. But when you're free to say no to some things, you get to set your priorities and boundaries. You get to decide how to spend your time. This means you'll have more time for the things that you care about: your family, your friends, personal goals, career goals, whatever it may be. You get to decide what you're spending your time with. No doesn't have to be a negative thing. If we all respect one another, it's just a matter of understanding each other better. Rachel, what would you like to add?
Saying no is going to save you a lot of hurt. As I just said, you will always look better if you say no to a project rather than fail to meet a deadline or do a poor job on that project. Saying no demonstrates your self-value and what your time is worth. I like what you said about no being a great gift to yourself, Lynn. It's about respecting yourself and giving yourself the time that you need, and to address what Amanda just said, the time that you need to consider the things that you love and that you value.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. And I want to thank Rachel and Amanda and to all our members and guests who've joined us for this installment in the Success at Work virtual mentoring series, and for being part of the dialogue here at Petite Queen. If you have a question or would like to suggest topics for discussion, please email us at jointheconversation@petitequeen.com.